Theme 13, Mahatma Gandhi and the Nationalist Movement, Civil Disobedience and Beyond. In the history of nationalism, a single individual is often identified with the making of a nation. Thus, for example, we associate Garibaldi with the making of the Italy, George Washington with the American War of Independence, and Ho Chi Minh with the struggle to free Vietnam from the colonial rule. In the same manner, Mahatma Gandhi has been regarded as the father of the Indian nation. In insofar insofar as Gandhiji was the most influential. Insofar Gandhiji was the most influential arrival to all the leaders who participated in the freedom struggle. That that characterization is not misplaced. However, like Washington or Ho Chi Minh, Mahatma Gandhi's political career was shaped and constrained by the society in which he lived. For individuals, even great ones, are made by history as they make history. This chapter analyzes Gandhiji's activities in India during the crucial period of 1915 से 1948. It explores his interactions with the different sections of the Indian society and the popular struggles that he inspired and led. So, first point, the leader announces himself. In January 1915, M.K. Gandhi returned to the homeland after 2 decades of residence abroad. These years had been spent for the most part of in South Africa, where he went as a lawyer and in time became a leader of the Indian community in that territory. As the historian Chandran historian Chandran Devanesan has remarked, South Africa was the making of the Mahatma Gandhi. South Africa was the making of the Mahatma. South Africa was the making of the Mahatma. It was in the South Africa that Mahatma Gandhi first forged the distinctive techniques of non-violent protest known as the Satyagraha, first promoted harmony between religions, and first altered upper caste Indian to their discriminated treatment of low caste and women. In India, the India that Mahatma Gandhi came back to in 1915 was rather different from the one that he had left in 1893. Although still a colony of the British, it was far more active in a political sense. The Indian National Congress now had branches in most major cities and towns. Through the Swadeshi movement in 1905, it had greatly broadened its appeal among the middle class. That movement had thrown up some towering leaders, among them Bal Gangadhar Tilak of Maharashtra, B.C. Pal of Bengal, Lala Lajpat Rai of Punjab. The three were known as Lal Bal Pal, the alliteration conveying the all India character of the struggle. Since their native provinces were very distant from one another, where these leaders advocated militant opposition to colonial rule, there was a group of moderates who preferred to a more gradual and persuasive approach. Among these moderates was Gandhiji's acknowledged political mentor Gopal Krishna Gokhale, as well as Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who, like Gandhi, was a lawyer of Gujarati extraction trained in London. On Gokhale's advice, Gandhiji spent a year traveling around British India, getting to know the land and its people. His first major public appearance was at the opening of the BHU in February 1916. Among the invitees to this event were the princes and philanthropists who donated whose donations had contributed to the founding of the BHU. Also also present were the important leaders of the Congress, such as Annie Besant. Compared to these dignitaries, Gandhiji was relatively unknown. He had been invited on account of his work in South Africa rather than his status within India. When his turn came to speak, Gandhiji charged the Indian elite with a lack of concern for the laboring poor. The opening of the BHU, he said, was certainly a most gorgeous show, but he worried about the contrast between the richly bedecked noblemen present and the millions of the poor Indians who were absent. Gandhiji told the privileged invitees that there is no salvation for India unless you strip yourself of this jewelry and hold it in trust for your countrymen in India. There can be no spirit of self government about us. He went on. If we take away or allow others to take away from the peasants almost the whole of the result of their labor, our salvation can only come through the farmer. Neither the lawyers, nor the doctors, nor the rich landlords are going to secure it. The opening of the BHU was an occasion for the celebration, marking as it did the opening of a nationalist university, sustained by Indian money and Indian initiative. But rather, but rather than adopt a tone of self-congratulation, Gandhiji chose instead to remind those present of the peasants and workers who constituted a majority of the Indian population yet were unrepresented in the audience. Gandhiji's speech at the Banaras in February 1916 was at one level merely a statement of fact, namely that Indian nationalism was an elite phenomenon, a creation of lawyers and doctors and landlords. But at the another level, it was also a statement of intent, the first public announcement of Gandhi's own desire to make Indian nationalism more properly representative in the Indian people as a whole. In the last month of that year, Gandhiji was presented with an opportunity to put his precepts into practice. At the annual Congress held in Lucknow in December 1916, he was approached by a peasant from Champaran in Bihar, who told him about the harsh treatment of the peasants by the British indigo planters. Second point, the making and unmaking of the non-cooperation. Mahatma Gandhi was to spend much of the 19 in Champaran, seeking to obtain for the peasants security of tenure as well as freedom to cultivate the crops of their choice. The following year, 1918, Gandhiji was involved in two campaigns in his home state of Gujarat. First, he intervened in a labor dispute in the Ahmedabad demanding better working conditions for the textile mill workers. Then he joined peasants in the Kheda in asking the state for the remission of taxes following the failure of their harvest. These initiatives in Champaran, Ahmedabad, and Kheda marked Gandhiji out as a nationalist with a deep sympathy for the poor. At the same time, these were all localized struggles. Then in 1919, the colonial rule delivered into Gandhiji's lap an issue from which he could construct a much wider movement. During the Great War of 1914, the British had instituted censorship of the press and permitted detention without trial. Now, on the recommendation of a committee chaired by the Rowlatt, Sir Sidney Rowlatt, these tough measures were continued. In response, Gandhiji called for a countrywide campaign against the Rowlatt Act. In towns across North and West India, life came to a standstill as shops shut down and schools closed in a response to Bandh Kal. The protests were particularly intense in the Punjab, where many men had served on the British side in the war, expecting to be rewarded of their service. Instead, they were given the Rowlatt Act. Gandhiji was detained while proceeding to Punjab, even as prominent local congressmen were arrested. The situation in the provinces grew progressively more tense, reaching a bloody climax in Amritsar in April 1919 when a British brigadier ordered his troops to open fire on a nationalist meeting. More than 400 people were killed in what is known as the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. It was a Rowlatt Satyagraha that made Gandhiji a truly national leader. Emboldened by its success, Gandhiji called for a campaign of non-cooperation with the British rule. Indians who wished colonialism to end were asked to stop attending schools, colleges, and law courts and not pay taxes. In some, they were asked to adhere to a renunciation of all voluntary associations with the British government. If non-cooperation was effectively carried out, said Gandhiji, India would win Swaraj within a year. To further broaden the struggle, he had joined hands with the Khilafat movement that sought to restore the caliphate, a symbol of pan-Islamism which had recently been abolished by the Turkish ruler Kemal Ataturk. So, in the box, what was the Khilafat movement? The Khilafat movement of 1919 was a movement of Indian Muslims led by the Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali that demanded the following. The Turkish Sultan or Khalifa must retain control of the Muslim sacred places in the erstwhile Ottoman Empire. The Jazirat ul Arab, that is Arabia, Iraq, and Syria and Palestine, must remain under Muslim sovereignty, and the Khalifa must be left with sufficient territory to enable him to defend the Islamic faith. The Congress supported the movement, and Mahatma Gandhi sought to conjoin it to the non cooperation movement. 2.1 Knitting a popular movement. Gandhiji hoped that by coupling non cooperation with Khilafat, India's two major religious communities, Hindus and Muslims, could collectively bring an end to the colonial rule. These movements certainly unleashed a surge of popular action that was altogether unprecedented in colonial India. Students stopped going to schools and colleges run by the government. Lawyers refused to attend court. The working class went on strike in many towns and cities. According to official figures, there were 396 strikes in 1921 involving 6 lakh workers and loss of 7 million workdays. The countryside was seething with discontent too. Hill tribes in North Andhra violated the forest laws. Farmers in the Awadh did not pay taxes. Peasants in the Kumaon refused to carry loads for colonial officials. These protest movements were sometimes carried out in defiance. of the local nationalist leadership. Peasants, workers, and other interpreted and acted upon the call to non-cooperate with colonial rule in ways that best suited their interest rather than conform to the dictates laid down from above. Non-cooperation, wrote Mahatma Gandhi's American biographer Louis Fisher, became the name of an epoch in the life of India and of Gandhiji. Non-cooperation was negative enough to be peaceful, but positive enough to be effective. It entailed, Louis Fisher बोल रहा है, it entailed denial, renunciation, and self-discipline. It was trained for self-rule. As a consequence of the non-cooperation movement in the British Raj was shaken to its foundation for the first time since the revolt of 1857. Then in February 1922, then in February 1922, a group of peasants attacked and torched a police station in the hamlet of Chauri Chaura in UP, now United Provinces, now UP and Uttarakhand. Several constables perished in the conflagration. This act of violence prompted Gandhiji to call off the movement altogether. No provocation, he insisted, can pos- no provocation, no provocation, no provocation, he insisted, can possibly justify the brutal murder of men who had been rendered defenseless and who had virtually thrown themselves on the mercy of the mob. During the non-cooperation movement, thousands of the Indians were put in jail. Gandhiji himself was arrested in March 1922 and charged with sedition. The judge who presided over his trial, Justice C. N. Broomfield, made a remarkable speech while pronouncing his sentence. It would be impossible to ignore the fact, remarked the judge, that you are in a different category from any person I have ever tried or am likely to try. It would be impossible to ignore the fact that in the eyes of the millions of your countrymen, you are a great patriot and a leader. Even those who differ from you in politics look upon you as a man of high ideals and of even saintly life. Since Gandhiji had violated the law, it was obligatory for the bench to sentence him to 6 years imprisonment. But said Judge Broomfield, if the course of the events in India should make it possible for the government to reduce the period and release you, no one will be better pleased than I. 2.2, A People's Leader. By 1922, Gandhiji had transformed Indian nationalism, thereby redeeming the promise he made in his BHO speech in February 1916. It was no longer a movement of professionals and intellectuals. Now hundreds of thousands of peasants, workers, and artisans also participated in it. Many of them venerated Gandhiji, referring to him as their Mahatma. They appreciated the fact that he dressed like them, lived like them, and spoke their language. Unlike other leaders, he did not stand apart from the common folk but empathized and even identified with them. This identification was strikingly reflected in his dress. While other nationalist leaders dressed formally, wearing a western suit or an Indian bandhgala, Gandhiji went among the people in a simple dhoti or loincloth. Meanwhile, he spent part of each day working on the charkha, that is spinning wheel, and encouraged after other nationals to do likewise. The act of spinning allowed Gandhiji to break the boundaries that prevailed within the traditional caste system between mental labor and manual labor. In a fascinating study, the historian Shahid Amin has phrased the image of Mahatma Gandhi among the peasants of eastern UP as conveyed by reports and rumors in the local press. When he traveled through the regions in the February 1921, Gandhiji was received by adoring crowds everywhere. In 1920, Mahatma Gandhi with Charkha has become the most abiding image of the Indian nationalism. In 1921, during a tour of South India, Gandhiji shaved his head and began wearing a loincloth in order to identify with the poor. His new appearance also came to symbolize asceticism and abstinence, qualities he celebrated in opposition to the consumerist culture of the modern world. So Young India 1919 से 1931, वीकली इंग्लिश न्यूज़पेपर, हरिजन 1933 in English, Harijan Bandhu in Gujarati and Harijan Sevak in Hindi. Indian opinion newspaper established by Mahatma Gandhi. So Gandhiji said in Young India in 13 November 1924, what I object to is the craze for machinery as such. The craze is for what they call labor saving machinery. Men go on saving labor till thousands are work Still thousands are without work and thrown on the open streets to die of starvation. I want to save time and labor, not for a fraction of mankind, but for all. I want the concentration of wealth not in the hands of the few, but in the hands of the all. Wherever Gandhiji went, rumors spread of his miraculous powers. In some places, it was said that he had been sent by the king to redress the grievances of the farmers and that he had the power to overrule all the local officials. In other places, it was claimed that Gandhiji's powers were was superior to that of the English monarch, and that with his arrival, the colonial rulers would flee the district. There were also stories reporting direct consequences for those who opposed him. Rumors spread of how villagers who criticized Gandhiji found their houses mysteriously falling their crops failing or their crops failing. Known variously as Gandhi Baba, Gandhi Maharaj, or simply Mahatma, Gandhiji appeared to the Indian peasant as a savior who would rescue them from high taxes and oppressive officials and restore dignity and autonomy to their lives. Gandhiji's appealing Gandhiji's appeal among the poor and the peasant in particular was enhanced by his ascetic lifestyle and by his shrewd use of symbols such as the dhoti and the charkha. Mahatma Gandhi was a caste Mahatma Gandhi was by caste a merchant and by profession a lawyer, but his simple lifestyle and love for working with his hands allowed him to empathize more fully with the laboring poor and for them in a return to empathize with him. Where most other politicians talked down to them, Gandhiji appeared not just to look like them but to understand them and lead to their lives. While Mahatma Gandhi's mass appeal was undoubtedly genuine and in the context of the Indian politics without precedent, it must also be stressed that his success in broadening the basis of nationalism was based on careful organization. New branches of the Congress were set up in various parts of India. A series of Praja Mandals were established to promote the nationalist creed in the princely states. Gandhiji encouraged the communication of the nationalist message in the mother tongue rather than in the language of the rulers, that is English. Thus, the provincial committees of the Congress were based on linguistic regions rather than on the artificial boundaries of the British India. In these different ways, nationalism was taken to the farthest corners of the country and embraced by social groups previously untouched by it. By now, among the supporters of the Congress, among the supporters of the Congress were some very prosperous businessmen and industrialists. Indian entrepreneurs were quick to recognize that in a free India, the favors enjoyed by their British competitors would come to an end. Some of these entrepreneurs, such as the G.D. Birla, support the national movement openly. Others did so tacitly, T-A-C-I-T-L-Y, tactically, tacitly. Thus, among Gandhiji's admirers were both poor and the rich industrialists, although the reason why peasants followed Gandhiji were somewhat different from and perhaps opposed to the reason of the industrialists. While Mahatma Gandhi's own role was vital, While Mahatma Gandhi's own role was vital, the growth of what we might call Gandhian nationalism also depended to a very substantial extent on his followers. Between 1917 and 22, a group of highly talented Indians attached themselves to Gandhiji. They included Mahadev Desai, Vallabhbhai Patel, J.B. Kripalani, Subhash Chandra Bose, Abul Kalam Azad, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sarojini Naidu, Govind Ballabh Pant, and C. Rajagopalachari. Again, Mahadev Desai, Vallabhbhai Patel, J.B. Kripalani, Subhash Chandra Bose, Abul Kalam Azad, J. Nehru, Sarojini Naidu, Govind Ballabh Pant, and C. Rajagopalachari. Notably, Notably, these close associates of Gandhiji came from different regions as well as different religious traditions. In turn, they inspired countless other Indians to join the Congress and work for it. Mahatma Gandhi was released from prison in February 1924 and now chose to devote his attention to the promotion of homespun cloth, that is khadi, and the abolition of untouchability. For Gandhiji was an much for Gandhiji was as for Gandhiji was as much a social reformer as he was a politician. He believed that in order to be worthy of freedom, Indians had to get rid of social evils such as child marriage and untouchability. Indians of one faith had also to cultivate a genuine tolerance for Indians of another. Hence, his emphasis of Hindu-Muslim harmony. Meanwhile, on the economic front, Indians had to learn to become self-reliant. Hence, his stress on the significance of wearing khadi rather than mill-made cloth imported from overseas. बरदौली सत्याग्रह by वल्लभ भाई पटेल in 1928 in Gujarat. Then third point, the Salt Satyagraha A case study. For several years after the non-cooperation movement ended, Mahatma Gandhi focused on his social reform work. In 1928, however, he began to think of re-entering politics. That year, there was an all-India campaign in the opposition to the all-white Simon Commission, sent from England to inquire into conditions in the colony. Gandhiji did not himself participate in the movement, although he gave it his blessings, as he did as he also did to a peasant satyagraha in Bardoli in the same year. In the end of December 1929, the Congress held its annual session in the city of Lahore. The meeting was significant for two things: the election of the J.L. Nehru as president, signifying the passing of the baton of the leadership to a younger generation, and the proclamation of the commitment to Purna Swaraj or the complete independence. Now the pace of politics picked up once more. On 26 January 1930, Independence Day was observed, with the national flag being hoisted in different venues and patriotic songs being sung. Gandhiji himself issued precise instruction as to how the day should be observed. It would be good, he said, if the declaration of independence whole is made by whole villages, whole cities even. It would be well if all the meetings were held at the identical minute in all the places. Gandhiji suggested that the time of the meeting be advertised in the traditional way by the beating of the drums. The celebrations would begin with the hoisting of the national flag. The rest of the day would be spent in doing some constructive work, whether it is pinning or service of untouchables, or reunion of Hindus and Muslims, or prohibition work, or even all these together, which is not impossible. Participants would take a pledge affirming that it was the inalienable right of the Indian people, as of any other people, to have freedom to enjoy the fruits of their toil, and that if any government derives a people of these rights and oppresses them, the people have a further right to alter it or abolish it. 3.1 Dandi. Soon after the observance of the Independence Day, Mahatma Gandhi announced that he would lead a march to break one of the most widely disliked laws in the British India, which gave the state a monopoly in the manufacture and sale of the salt. His speaking on the salt monopoly was another illustration of Gandhi's tactical wisdom. For in every Indian household, salt was indispensable, yet people were forbidden from making salt even for domestic use, compelling them to buy it from shops at a high price. The state monopoly over salt was deeply unpopular. By making it his target, Gandhiji hoped to mobilize a wider discontent against the British rule. Where most Indians understood the significance of the Gandhiji's challenge, the British Raj apparently did not. Although Gandhiji had given advance notice to his salt march to the Viceroy Lord Irwin, but Irwin failed to grasp the significance of the action. On 12 March 1930, Gandhiji began working from his ashram at Sabarmati towards the ocean. He reached his destination 3 weeks later, making a fistful of salt as he did, and thereby making himself a criminal in the eyes of the law. Meanwhile, the parallel salt marches were being conducted in other parts of the country. On 6 April 1930. So, in the box, why the salt satyagraha? Why was salt the symbol of protest? This is what Mahatma Gandhi wrote. The volume of information being gained daily shows how wickedly the salt tax has been designed in order to prevent the use of the salt that has not paid the tax, which is at the times even 14 times its value. The government destroys the salt it cannot sell profitably. Thus, it taxes the nation's vital necessity. It prevents the public from manufacturing it and destroys what nature manufactures without effort. No adjective is strong enough no adjective is strong enough for characterizing this wicked dog in the Menger policy. From various sources, I hear tales of such wanton destruction of the nation's property in all the parts of India. Mounds, if not tons, of the salts are said to be destroyed on the Konkan coast. The same tale comes from Grandi. Wherever there is likelihood of natural salt being used, is salt being taken away by the people living in the neighboring neighborhood of such areas of for their personal use. Salt officers are posted for the sole purpose of carrying on destruction. Thus, valuable national property is destroyed at national expenses and salt taken out of the mouths of the people. The salt monopoly is thus a fourfold curse. It deprives the people of the valuable easy village industry, involves wanton destruction of the property that nature produces in abundance. The destruction itself means more national expenditure, and fourthly, to crown this folly, an unheard of tax of more than 1000% is exacted from a starving people. This tax has remained so long because of the apathy of the general public. Now that it is sufficiently roused, the tax has to go. How soon it will be abolished depends upon the strength of the people. This box from the collected works of the Mahatma Gandhi, CWMG, Volume 49, by Mahatma Gandhi. So in CWMG, that is collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, Volume 49, this is a single line from the box that I have been taking. He is a civilized man who feels ashamed to do anything which his neighbors would disapprove. What if I and all the eminent leaders in the Gujarat and the rest of the country are arrested? This movement is based on the faith that when a whole nation is roused and on the march, no leader is necessary. So the main text, as with non-cooperation, apart from the officially sanctioned nationalist campaign, there were numerous other streams of protest across large parts of India. Peasants breathed the hated colonial forest laws that kept them and their capital out of the woods in which they had once roamed freely. In some towns, factory workers went on the strike while lawyers boycotted British courts and students refused to attend government run education institutions. As in 1920-22, now as in 1920, now too, Gandhiji's call had encouraged Indians of all classes to make manifest their own discontent with the colonial rule. The rulers responded by detaining the dissenters. In the wake of the Salt March, nearly 60,000 Indians were arrested, among them, of course, Gandhiji himself. The progress of Gandhiji's march to the seashore can be traced from the secret reports filed by the police officials deputed to monitor his movements. These reproduce the speeches he gave at the village in Rote, in which he called upon local officials to renounce government employment and join the freedom struggle. In one village, Vasna or Vasna, WSNA, Gandhiji told the upper caste that if you are out for Swaraj, you must serve untouchables. You won't get Swaraj merely for the repeal of the salt taxes or other taxes. For Swaraj, you must make amends for the wrongs which you did to the untouchables. For Swaraj, Hindu, Muslims, Parsis, and Sikhs will have to unite. These are the steps towards Swaraj. He was campaigning for untouchables even before the sacred separate electorates for the untouchables. The police spies reported that Gandhiji's meetings were very well attended by villagers of all castes and by women as well as men. They observed that thousands of volunteers were flocking into the nationalist cause. Among them were many officials who had resigned from their post with the colonial government. Writing to the government, the district superintendent of the police remarked, Mr. Gandhi appeared calm and collected. He is gathering more strength as he proceeds. The process of the progress of the Salt March can also be traced from the other sources. The American news magazine Time, this to begin with, scorned at Gandhiji's looks, writing with disdain of his spindly frame and his spindly loins. Thus, in its first report on the march, Time was deeply skeptical of the Salt March reaching its destination. It claimed that Gandhiji sank to the ground at the end of the second day's walking. The magazine did not believe that the emaciated saint would be physically able to go much further, but within a week it had changed its mind. The massive popular following that the march generated road time generated road time had made the British rulers desperately anxious. Gandhiji himself, they know, saluted as a saint and statesman who was using Christian acts as a weapon against men with Christian beliefs. Figure showing figure. After Mahatma Gandhi's release from the prison in January 1931, Congress leaders met at the Allahabad to place the future course of action. So in the image, Jawaharlal Nehru, Jamnalal Bajaj, Subhash Chandra Bose, Gandhiji, Mahadev Desai, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. So in the box, the problem with separate electorates. At the Round Table Conference, Mahatma Gandhi stated his arguments against the state electorates for the depressed classes. Separate electorates to the untouchables will ensure them bondage in perpetuity. Do you want the untouchables to remain untouchables forever? Well, the separate electorates would perpetuate the stigma. What is needed is destruction of untouchability, and when you have done it, the bar sinister, which has been imposed by an insolent superior class upon an inferior class, will be destroyed. When you have destroyed the bar sinister, to whom will you give the separate electorates? 3.2. The Salt March was notable for at least three reasons. First, it was this event. First, it was this event that first brought Mahatma Gandhi to the world attention. The march was widely covered by the European and American press. Second, it was the first nationalist activity in which the women participated in large numbers. The socialist activist Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay had persuaded Gandhiji not to restrict the protest to men alone. Kamala Devi was herself one of the numerous women who courted arrest by breaking the salt or liquor laws. Third, and perhaps the most significant, it was the Salt March which forced upon the British the realization that their Raj would not last forever and that they would have to devolve some powers to the Indians. To that end, the British government convened a series of roundtable conferences in London. The first meeting was held in November 1930 but without the preeminent political leaders in India, thus rendering it an exercise in futility. Gandhiji was released from jail in January 1931 and the following month had several long meetings with the Viceroy. These culminated in what is called the Gandhi-Irvin Pact, by the terms of which civil disobedience would be called off. All prisoners released, all prisoners released, all prisoners released, and salt manufacture allowed along the coast. The the Gandhi-Irvin Pact was criticized by radical nationalists for Gandhiji. For Gandhiji was unable to obtain from the Viceroy a commitment to political independence for Indians. He could obtain merely an assurance of talks towards that possible end. A second round table conference was held in London in the latter part of the 1931. Here Gandhiji represented the Congress. However, his claims that his party represented all India came under the challenge from the three parties, that is, from the Muslim League, which claimed to stand for the interest of the Muslim minority, from the princes, who claimed that the Congress had no stake in their territories, and from the brilliant lawyer and the thinker Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who argued that the Gandhiji and the Congress did not really represent the lowest caste. The conference in the London was inconclusive, so Gandhiji returned to India and resumed civil disobedience. The new Viceroy, Lord Wellington, was deeply unsympathetic to the Indian leader. In 1935, however, a new Government of India Act promised some form of representative government. 2 years later, in an election held on the basis of a restricted franchise, the Congress won a comprehensive victory. Now, 8 out of 11 provinces had a Congress Prime Minister working under the supervision of a British governor. In September 1935, 2 years after the Congress ministers assumed office, the Second World War broke out. Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru had both been strongly critical of the Hitler and Nazis. Accordingly, they promised Congress support to the war effort if the British in return promised to grant Indian independence once hostilities ended. The offer was refused. In protest, the Congress ministers resigned in October 1930, no, October 1939. Through 1940 and 41, the Congress organized a series of individual satyagrahas to pressure the rulers to promise freedom once the war had ended. In the box, Ambedkar on separate electorates. In response to Mahatma Gandhi's opposition to the demand for separate electorates for the depressed classes, Ambedkar wrote, "Here is a class which is undoubtedly not in the position to sustain itself in the struggle for existence. The religion to which they are tied, instead of providing them an honorable place, brands them as lepers, not fit for ordinary intercourse. Economically, it is a class entirely dependent upon the high caste Hindus for earning its daily bread with no independent way of living open to it, nor are always closed by reason of the social prejudices of the Hindus. But there is a definite attempt all through our Hindu society to bolt every possible door so as not to allow the depressed classes any opportunity to rise in the scale of life. In these circumstances, it would be granted by all the fair-minded persons. In these circumstances, it would be granted by all fair-minded persons that as the only path for a community so handicapped to succeed in the struggle for life against organized tyranny, some share of political power in order that it may protect itself in a paramount necessity. This was from the Dr. Baba Sahab Ambedkar. What Congress and Gandhiji have done to the untouchables. Writings and Speeches, volume number 9, page number 312. Figure 13.10. Mahatma Gandhi and Rajendra Prasad on their way to a meeting with the Viceroy Lord Linlithgow, 13 October 1939. In the meeting, the nature of the India's involvement in the war was discussed. When negotiations with the viceroy broke down, the Congress ministers resigned. Lord Lithgow was the viceroy during the Second World War. During the beginning of the Second World War. Acha. Main text. Meanwhile, in March 1940, the Muslim League passed a resolution committing itself to the creation of a separate nation called the Pakistan. The political landscape was now complicated. It was no longer Indians versus the British. Rather, rather it had become a three-way struggle between the Congress, the Muslim League, and the British. At this time, the Britain had an all-party government whose Labour members were sympathetic to Indian aspirations, but whose conservative Prime Minister Winston Churchill was a die-hard imperialist who insisted that he had not been appointed the King's First Minister in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire. In the spring of 1942, Churchill was persuaded to send one of his ministers, Sir Stafford Cripps, to India to try and forge a compromise with the Gandhiji and Congress. Talks broke down, however, after the Congress insisted that if it was to help the British defend India from the Axis power, then the Viceroy had first to appoint an Indian as the defense minister of his executive council. Fourth point, quit India. After the failure of the Cripps mission, Mahatma Gandhi decided to launch his third major movement against the British rule. This was the Quit India campaign, which began in August 1942. Although Gandhiji was jailed at once, younger activists organized strikes and acts of sabotage all over the country. Particularly active in the underground resistance were socialist members of the Congress, such as Jayaprakash Narayan. In several districts, such as Satara in the west and Medinipur in the east, independent governments were proclaimed. The British responded with much force, yet it took more than a year to suppress the rebellion. Quit India was generally a mass movement, bringing into its ambit hundreds of thousands of ordinary Indians. It especially energized the young who, in very large numbers, left their colleges to go to jail. However, while the Congress leaders languished in jail, Jinnah and his colleagues in the Muslim League worked patiently at expanding their influence. It was in these years that the League began to make a mark in the Punjab and Sindh provinces where it had previously had scarcely any presence. In June 1940, with the end of the war in sight, Gandhiji was released from the prison. Later that year, he held a series of meetings with Jinnah seeking to bridge the gap between the Congress and the League. In 1945, the Labour government came to power in the Britain and committed itself to granting independence to India. Meanwhile, back in India, the Viceroy Lord Wavell brought the Congress and the League together for a series of talks. Early in 1946, fresh elections were held to the provincial legislatures. The Congress served a general category, but in seats specifically reserved for the Muslims. The League won an overwhelming majority. The political polarization was complete. A cabinet mission sent in the summer of 1946 failed to get the Congress and the League to agree on a federal system that would keep India together while allowing the provinces a degree of autonomy. After the talks broke down, Jinnah called for a direct action day to press the League's demand for Pakistan. On the designated day, 16 August 1946, bloody riots broke out in Calcutta. The violence spread to rural Bengal, then to Bihar, and then to across the country to the United Provinces and the Punjab. In some places, Muslims were the main sufferers, in other places, Hindus. So, in the box in Satara 1943, from the late 19th century, a non Brahman movement which opposed the caste system and landlordism has developed in Maharashtra. This movement established linked with the national movement by the 1930s. In 1943, some of the younger leaders in the Satara district of the Maharashtra set up the parallel government, that is Prati Sarkar, with volunteer corps, that is Seva Dals, and village units, that is Tufan Dals. They ran uh, they ran people's courts and organized constructive work dominated by Kunbi peasants and supported by Dalits. The Satara Prati Sarkar functioned till elections of 1946 despite the government repression and in the later stages Congress disapproval. Congress disapproval. So in the image showing the Nehru and Patel represented two distinct political tendencies within the Congress, the socialist and the conservative. Mahatma Gandhi had to often mediate between these groups. In February 1947, Wavell was replaced as a viceroy by Lord Mountbatten. Mountbatten called on one last round of talks, but when these two proved inconclusive, he announced that the British India would be freed but also divided. The formal transfer of the power was fixed for 15 August. When that day came, it was celebrated with gusto in different parts in India. In Delhi, there was prolonged applause when the President of the Constituent Assembly began the meeting by invoking the father of the nation, M.K. Gandhi. Outside the assembly, the crowd shouted, Mahatma Gandhi ki jai. Fifth point, 300 fifth point. The last heroic days. As it happened, Mahatma Gandhi was not present at the festivals in the capital on 15 August 1947. He was in Calcutta, but he did not attend any function or hoist a flag there either. Gandhiji marked the day with a 24-hour fast. The freedom he had, the freedom he had struggled so long, the freedom he had struggled so long for, had come at an unacceptable price. With the nation divided and Hindus and Muslims at each other's throats. Through September and October, writes his biographer D.G. Tendulkar, Gandhiji went around hospitals and refugee camps giving consolations to distressed people. He appealed to the Sikhs, the Hindus, and the Muslims to forget the past and not to dwell on their sufferings, but to extend the right hand of fellowship to each other and to determine to live in peace. At the initiative at the initiative of Gandhiji and Nehru, the Congress now passed a resolution on the rights of minorities. The party had never accepted the two-nation theory, forced against its bill to accept partition. It still believed that India is a land of many religions and many races and must remain so. Whatever be the situation in Pakistan, India would be a democratic secular state where all citizens enjoy full rights and are equally entitled to the protection of the state, irrespective of the religion to which they belong. The Congress wished to assure the minorities in India that it will continue to protect to the best of its ability their citizen rights against aggression. Many scholars have written of the months after the independence as being Gandhiji's finest hours. After working to bring peace to Bengal, Gandhiji now shifted to Delhi, from where he hoped to move on to the right torn districts of Punjab. While in the capital, his meetings were disrupted by refugees who objected to readings from the Quran or shouted slogans asking why he did not speak of the sufferings of those Hindus and Sikhs still living in Pakistan. In fact, as D.G. Tendulkar writes, Gandhiji was equally concerned with the sufferings of the minority community in the Pakistan. He would have liked to be able to go to their succor, but with what face could he now go there when he could not guarantee full redress to the Muslims in Delhi? There was an attempt on Gandhiji's life on 20 January 1948, but he carried on undaunted. On 26 January, he spoke at his prayer. On 26 January, he spoke at his prayer meeting of how that day had been celebrated in the past as Independence Day. Now freedom had come, but its first few months had been deeply disillusioning. However, he trusted that the worst is over, that Indians would henceforth work collectively for the equality of all classes and creeds, never the domination of never the domination and superiority of the major community over a minor, however insignificant it may be in the numbers or influence. He also permitted himself the hope that though geographically and politically India is divided into two, at heart we shall ever be friends and brothers, helping and respecting one another and be one for the outside world. Gandhiji had fought a lifelong battle for a free and united India, and yet, when the country was divided, he urged that the two parts respect and befriend one another. Other Indians were less forgiving. At his daily prayer meetings on the evening of 30th January, Gandhiji was shouted by a young man. The assassin who surrendered afterwards was a Brahmin from Pune named Nathuram Godse, the editor of the extremist Hindu newspaper who had denounced Gandhiji as an appeaser of Muslims. Gandhiji's death led to an extraordinary outpouring of grief, with rich tributes being paid to him from across the political spectrum in India, and moving appreciations coming from such international figures as Orwell and Albert Einstein. Time magazine, Time magazine, which had once mocked Gandhi's physical, physical size and seemingly non-rational ideas, now compared his martyrdom to that of the Abraham Lincoln. It was a bigoted American who had killed Lincoln for believing that human beings were equal regardless of their race or skin color, and it was a bigoted Hindu who had killed Gandhiji for believing that friendship was possible, indeed necessary, between Indians of different faiths. In this respect, as Time wrote, the world knew that it had, in a sense, too deep, too simple for the world to understand, connived at his death, as it had connived at Lincoln's. Knowing Gandhi. Knowing Gandhi. Public Voices and Private Scripts. Mahatma Gandhi regularly published in his journal Harijan letters that others wrote to him. Nehru edited a collection of letters written to him during the national movement and published a bunch of old letters. Socialist कौन थे जयप्रकाश नारायण NG Nanga कने नरेंद्र देव. One in the box, one event through letters. In the 1920s, Jawaharlal Nehru was increasingly influenced by socialism, and he returned from Europe in 1920 deeply impressed with the Soviet Union. As he began working closely with the socialists, that is Jayaprakash Narayan, Narendra Dev, NG Ranga, and others, a rift developed between the socialists and the conservatives within the Congress. After becoming the Congress president in 1936, Nehru spoke passionately against fascism and upheld the demands of the workers and peasants. Worried by Nehru's socialist rhetoric, the conservatives led by Rajendra Prasad and Sardar Patel threatened to resign from the working committee, and some prominent industrialists in Bombay issued a statement attacking Nehru. Rajendra Prasad and Sardar Patel were conservatives. Both Prasad and Nehru turned to Mahatma Gandhi and met him at his ashram at Vartha. The latter acted as a mediator, as he often did, restraining Nehru's radicalism and persuading Prasad and others to see the significance of Nehru's leadership. This is from the in a bunch of old letters, 1958. Nehru reprinted many of the letters that were exchanged at the time. So these were the letters. 6.2 Framing a picture. Autobiographies similarly give us an account of the past that is often rich in human detail. But here again, we have to be careful of the way we read and interpret autobiographies. We need to remember that they are retrospective accounts written very often from memory. They tell us what the author could recollect, what he or she saw as important, or what keen on recounting, or how a person wanted his or her life to be viewed by others. Writing an autography is a way of framing a picture of yourself. So, in reading these accounts, we have to try and see what the author does not tell us. We need to understand the reasons for that silence, those willful or unwitting acts of forgetting. 6.3 Through police eyes. Another vital source is government records. For the for the colonial rulers kept close tabs on those they regarded as critical of the government. The letters and reports written by policemen and other officials were secret at the time, but now can be accessed in archives. Let us look at one such source, the fortnightly reports that were prepared by the Home Department from the early 20th century. These reports were based on the police information from the localities, what often expressed what the higher officials saw or wanted to believe. While noticing the possibility of sedition and rebellion, they liked to assure themselves that these fears were unwarranted. If you see the fortnightly reports for the period of the Salt March, you will notice that the Home Department was unwilling to accept that Mahatma Gandhi's actions had evoked any enthusiastic response from the masses. The march was seen as drama and antique, a desperate effort to mobilize people who were unwilling to rise against the British and were busy with their daily schedules, happy under the Raj. So these are some fortnightly reports of the Home Department. Central provinces and Berad. Their the arrest of Vallabhbhai Patel caused little excitement except in Congress circles, but a meeting organized by the Nagpur Nagar Congress Committee to congratulate Gandhi on the start of his march was attended by a crowd of over 3,000 people in Nagpur, Bengal. In Bengal, Mr. James Sen Gupta had formed an All Bengal Civil Disobedience Council. Mr. James Sen Gupta had formed an All Bengal Civil Disobedience Council, and the Bengal Provincial Government Committee has formed an All Bengal Council of Disobedience. बस शब्दों का हेर फेर है. जेम्स गुप्ता ने बनाई ऑल बंगाल सिविल डिसोबीडियंस काउंसिल, जबकि जो बंगाल कांग्रेस थी उसने बनाई ऑल बंगाल काउंसिल ऑफ डिसोबीडियंस. The ladies are attending these meetings in increasing numbers in Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. In Bihar and Odisha, there is a good deal of talk about a campaign to withhold payment of the Chaukidari tax, but no tax has yet been selected for experiment. In Madras, the 12th of the March was celebrated as the day of inaugurating the civil disobedience campaign. 12th of March in Madras. Bombay, Press Kesari indulged in offensive language. Also in Bombay, on the other hand, the mob the moderate paper विविध वृत्त moderate paper विविध वृत्त जो है moderate paper था बॉम्बे में pointed out the futility of the movement and opined that it could not achieve the end in view. It, however, reminded the government that repression would defeat its purpose. Central now again, this is another fortnightly report for the second half of the March 1930. Central provinces and Berar. In Nagpur, these meetings were well attended and most of the schools and colleges were deserted on the 12th March to mark the inauguration of Gandhi's march. The boycott of the liquor shops and the infringement of the forest laws appear to be the most probable line of attack. In Punjab, attempts will be made to break the salt law in the Jhelum district, that the agitation relating to the non-payment of the water tax in the Multan will be revived, and that some movement in the connection with the national flag will be started probably at Gujranwala. For the first half of the April 1930, in UP, United Provinces, the SALT Act has been openly defied at Agra, Kanpur, Banaras, Allahabad, Lucknow, Meerut, Raebareli, Farrukhabad, Etawah, Balia, and Mainpuri. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was arrested at Chowki Railway (CHEOKI). Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was arrested at Chowki Railway Station early on the morning of 14 April as he was proceeding to the central provinces to attend a meeting of Youth League. He was at once taken direct to Naini Central Jail, where he was tried and sentenced to 6 months simple imprisonment. Bihar and Odisha may be central provinces. In Jubbalpur, Seth Govindadas has attempted to manufacture chemical salt at a cost many times in excess to the market price of the clean salt. In Madras, in Visakhapatnam, attempted to seize salt made by the boiling seawater. Considerable opposition was shown at the Visakhapatnam to police when they attempted to seize salt made by the boiling seawater. But elsewhere, resistance to the seizure of the illicit salt has been half-hearted. In Bengal, in the Mufazzal efforts, efforts have been made to manufacture illicit salt. The main operation areas being the districts of Chobis Pargana and Midnapur. 6.4 from the newspapers. One more important source is contemporary newspapers published in English as well as in the different Indian languages, which tracked Mahatma Gandhi's movements and reported on his activities and also represented what ordinary Indians thought of him. Newspaper accounts, however, should not be seen as unprejudiced. They were published by people who had their own political opinions and worldviews. These ideas shaped of what these ideas shaped what was published and the way events were reported. The accounts that were published in a London newspaper would be different from the report in an Indian nationalist paper. We need to look at these reports but should be careful while interpreting them. Every statement made in this cannot be accepted literally as representing what was happening on the ground. They often reflect the fears and the anxieties of officials who were unable to control a movement and were anxious about its spread. They did not know whether to arrest Mahatma Gandhi or what an arrest would mean. The more the colonial state kept a watch on the public and its activities, the more it worried about the basis of its rule. Then, in the end, the timeline. 1915 Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa. 1917 Champaran movement. 1918 peasant movements in Kheda in Gujarat and workers movement in Ahmedabad. In 1919 Rowlatt Satyagrah in March and April. In 1919 Jallianwala Bagh massacre in April. 1921 non-cooperation and Khilafat movement. 1928 peasant movement in Bardoli. अच्छा रॉलेट सत्याग्रह पहले हुआ 1919 में, फिर जलियांवाला बाग मैसेकर हुआ, फिर 1921 में नॉन कॉपरेशन खिलाफ मूवमेंट, फिर 1928 में पीजन मूवमेंट इन बरदौली, फिर 1929 में पूर्ण स्वराज एक्सेप्टेड एज कांग्रेस कॉल एट द लाहौर कांग्रेस सेशन इन दिसंबर. 1930 सिविल डिसोबीडियंस मूवमेंट बिगिन दांडी मार्च अप्रैल दांडी मार्च अप्रैल. 1931 गांधी इरविन पैक्ट इन मार्च. In 1931 second round table conference in December. 1935 Government of India Act promises some form of representative government. 1939 Congress ministers resign. 1942 Quit India movement begins in August. 1946 Mahatma Gandhi visits Noakhali and other right torn areas to stop communal violence. 1946 में जो है महात्मा गांधी जो है नोआखली गया था एंड अदर राइट और जो अदर दंगों वाले इलाके थे वहाँ गया था टू स्टॉप द वायलेंस communal violence.